They thought they could crush his spirit. When the HOA demanded Tom Harper take down his cherished holiday decorations or face massive fines, he was stunned. Leading the charge was Karen Rose, the domineering HOA president who thrived on control, dismissing his protests with a cold, "The rules are the rules." What Karen didn't know was that Tom wasn't backing down. Her web of lies and misuse of power was about to unravel, exposing secrets that would change everything. And it all started with a single, glowing star. The Harpers' home had always been a beacon of joy during the holiday season. Tom, a dedicated family man and a skilled craftsman, took immense pride in his decorations. Every string of lights, every snowman, and especially the towering handmade star that crowned their front lawn was a labor of love. The star was more than just a decoration. It was a tribute to Tom's late father, who had passed down the tradition of festive decorating. It was their way of spreading cheer to the neighborhood, a tradition that brought smiles to everyone who passed by. Or so they thought. One chilly December evening, as Tom was adjusting the lights around the star, his wife Linda came out holding an envelope with a puzzled expression. "Tom, this just came in from the HOA," she said, her voice tinged with concern. Tom wiped his hands on his jeans and opened the letter. The words inside felt like a slap in the face. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Harper, your recent holiday decorations violate the aesthetic standards outlined in the HOA's updated guidelines. You are required to remove all non-compliant decorations within 48 hours to avoid penalties." Tom's hands tightened around the paper. He read the letter again, hoping he'd misunderstood, but the message was clear. Linda watched him anxiously. "What does it say?" she asked. "They want us to take everything down," Tom said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "They're saying our decorations don't meet their standards." Linda's face fell. "But the neighbors love them. And we've been doing this for years. Why now?" Tom didn't have an answer, but he had a hunch. The HOA president, Karen Rose, had taken office earlier that year, and her reputation for strict enforcement of arbitrary rules was already well known. Karen had a vision for the neighborhood, one where every house looked like it belonged in a sterile magazine spread. Anything that deviated from her idea of perfection was swiftly dealt with. Tom decided to confront Karen directly. He called the HOA office the next morning, determined to resolve the issue. After several frustrating minutes of being transferred from one person to another, he finally reached her. "Mrs. Rose, this is Tom Harper," he began, trying to keep his voice calm. "I received a notice about our holiday decorations. There must be some mistake. We've been putting up these decorations for years." Karen's tone was icy. "Mr. Harper, there is no mistake. The HOA updated its guidelines this year to ensure uniformity and uphold property values. Your decorations are excessive and disruptive." Tom's temper flared. "Disruptive? They're decorations, not a rock concert." Karen remained unyielding. "The rules are the rules, Mr. Harper. You have until Friday to comply, or you will be fined $500 for each day the decorations remain up." Tom hung up the phone, his frustration boiling over. This wasn't just about decorations. It was about control, about someone dictating how they could celebrate in their own home. Linda placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure this out," she said softly. But as the deadline loomed, the reality of their situation became clearer. If they didn't take down the decorations, the fines would quickly spiral out of control. Tom's determination hardened. He wasn't going to let Karen ruin their holiday tradition without a fight. He spent the next day speaking with neighbors, hoping to rally support. Many shared their own frustrations with the HOA's increasingly overbearing rules. One neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins, shook his head and said, "This used to be such a friendly neighborhood. Now it feels like we're living under a dictatorship." Encouraged by their shared grievances, Tom began gathering signatures for a petition to challenge the HOA's new guidelines. But as he worked, another letter arrived, a final warning from the HOA, accompanied by a notice of the first fine. Tom stood on his porch, staring at the paper. The towering star behind him cast a warm glow over the lawn, a silent reminder of what was at stake. He knew he had to stand his ground, not just for his family, but for everyone in the neighborhood who felt the weight of Karen's rules. As he walked back inside, he couldn't help but glance at the star one more time. "We're not backing down," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Not this time." The morning after receiving the HOA's final warning, Tom sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread out before him. His coffee had gone cold, untouched. Linda was on the other side of the table, her phone in hand, scrolling through emails from neighbors who'd shared their support. "Tom," she began hesitantly, "some of them are scared to sign the petition. They think Karen might retaliate." Tom frowned, running a hand through his hair. "Retaliate? How? She's already fining us for lights, Linda. What's next? Fining Jenkins for putting a pumpkin on his porch?" Linda sighed. "You know how she operates. The smallest thing becomes a violation. If people push back, she'll find ways to make their lives miserable, and not everyone can afford to fight her." Tom looked out the window at their glowing star, standing tall despite the threat. His father's words echoed in his mind. "You don't back down from what's right, son. Not ever." That resolve was what drove him to pick up the phone and call Karen's office again. This time, Karen answered on the second ring, her voice as clipped as ever. "Mr. Harper, I assume you're calling to confirm your compliance with the HOA's guidelines." Tom kept his tone steady, though his jaw tightened. "Mrs. Rose, I'm calling to ask for a copy of the meeting minutes where these new guidelines were voted on. I'd also like a breakdown of the fines and penalties issued under your leadership." There was a long pause on the other end before Karen responded, her voice laced with irritation. "I don't see how that information is relevant to your situation, Mr. Harper. The guidelines are clear, and you've been provided with ample notice." "Actually," Tom said, his confidence growing, "it's entirely relevant. If these guidelines weren't properly voted on by the residents, they're invalid. And if the fines you're issuing don't align with state HOA regulations, well, that's a problem too, isn't it?" Karen's tone turned icy. "I suggest you focus on bringing your property into compliance, Mr. Harper. Otherwise, we'll have no choice but to escalate this matter further." She hung up before he could reply. Tom stared at the phone, his frustration mounting. Linda, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "What did she say?" "She's hiding something," Tom said, his voice firm. "I need to find out what." Determined to uncover the truth, Tom began digging into the HOA's operations. He reviewed the HOA's bylaws, cross-checked the fines they'd issued, and reached out to neighbors who had faced similar situations. One neighbor, Sarah, shared that she'd been fined for her children's chalk drawings on the driveway. Another family had been penalized for having too many guests during a birthday party. "These aren't violations," Tom said during a small gathering of supportive neighbors at his house. "This is Karen abusing her power." As they shared stories, one neighbor mentioned a strange incident that caught Tom's attention. "Karen had a contractor come to my house a few months ago," the man said. "She said it was for community upgrades. Next thing I know, they're installing lights outside my property line and billing me for it." Tom's eyes narrowed. "Do you have the invoices for that?" The neighbor nodded, pulling up photos on his phone. Tom scanned them, noting the contractor's name. He jotted it down and decided to investigate further. A few days later, Tom's investigation led him to the office of the contractor who had installed the lights. Posing as a potential client, he struck up a conversation with the manager. "You've done work in my neighborhood," Tom said casually. "I was thinking of upgrading my property too. What kind of projects have you done around here?" The manager, eager for business, started listing projects. "We've done a lot for the HOA. Lights, fencing, even some landscaping. Mostly paid for by the association, but a few upgrades were privately commissioned." "Privately commissioned?" Tom asked, feigning curiosity. "Yeah, the HOA president, Karen, I think her name was. She had us do some custom work at her property. Nice place she's got." Tom's stomach dropped. Karen had been using HOA funds for her personal gain. Now he had proof. That evening, Tom returned home and shared his findings with Linda. "She's been stealing from the HOA," he said, pacing the living room. "She's fining us, threatening us, all while funneling money into her own house." Linda's eyes widened. "We need to do something, Tom, but how? She'll just deny everything." Tom nodded slowly, a plan forming in his mind. "She can deny it all she wants, but she can't deny the evidence. We're going to expose her." The next day, Tom and his neighbors met again, this time to strategize. They decided to document everything: letters, fines, invoices, and photos. Tom also reached out to a local journalist who had covered HOA disputes in the past. The journalist, intrigued by the story, agreed to look into it. "If what you're saying is true," she said, "this could be a major scandal, but we'll need solid proof to back it up." Tom handed over the evidence he had gathered so far. As he did, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about decorations anymore. This was about standing up to someone who had taken advantage of an entire community. That night, as he stood on the porch, looking at the star glowing brightly against the dark sky, Tom felt a mix of hope and determination. Karen might have played her games, but now it was his turn. And he wasn't going to lose. The morning was crisp, with a biting wind that hinted at snow. Tom stood on his porch, gazing at the glowing star that seemed to defy the tension hanging in the air. Overnight, he had received yet another letter from Karen. This one wasn't just a warning. It was an ultimatum. The fines were now up to $2,500, and the HOA threatened to take legal action if he didn't remove his decorations by the end of the week. Linda joined him outside, a mug of coffee in her hands. "Tom," she began, her voice heavy with worry, "this is getting out of control. What if they actually take us to court? We can't afford a drawn-out legal battle." Tom turned to her, his expression resolute. "I know it's a risk, but if we back down now, what's stopping her from doing this to someone else? This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone in this neighborhood who's been bullied by Karen." Linda nodded slowly, her worry giving way to quiet determination. "So, what's the plan?" Tom had spent the previous night formulating a strategy. He reached out to a few key allies in the neighborhood, including Sarah, Mr. Jenkins, and a couple of younger families who were fed up with Karen's antics. Together, they decided to take the fight to the HOA. The first step was public exposure. Tom contacted the journalist he had spoken with earlier, providing her with a treasure trove of evidence: photos of the decorations, copies of the fines, and, most damning of all, the invoices showing Karen's misuse of HOA funds. The journalist promised to write a feature story, but she needed more, something that would make the issue impossible to ignore. That is when Sarah had an idea. What if we make this bigger than just one house? If Karen thinks your lights are disruptive, let's show her what real disruption looks like. Tom raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Let's turn this into a neighborhood event, Sarah said, her eyes alight with excitement. If everyone decorates their homes, she can't target just you. And if we invite the press to cover it, she won't be able to sweep it under the rug. The plan was bold, almost reckless, but Tom couldn't help but smile. Let's do it, he said. Over the next few days, Tom and his neighbors worked tirelessly. Word spread quickly, and even residents who had been hesitant to get involved began to join in. Lights went up on every house, wreaths appeared on doors, and inflatable snowmen dotted front yards. It was as if the entire neighborhood had come alive, united in defiance of Karen's tyranny. Meanwhile, the journalist worked behind the scenes, digging deeper into the HOA's finances. What she uncovered was even worse than Tom had imagined. Karen had been using HOA funds not just for personal upgrades, but also for lavish dinners, spa treatments, and even a private landscaping project for her second home. When the journalist called Tom to share her findings, he felt a surge of vindication. "This is it," he said. "This is how we bring her down." On the evening of the event, the neighborhood was transformed into a dazzling wonderland. Every house glowed with festive lights, and the streets were filled with the sounds of laughter and holiday music. Tom's star shone brighter than ever, its light a beacon of hope and resilience. As residents gathered to celebrate, a local news crew arrived, capturing the spectacle. The journalist, now armed with a detailed exposé of Karen's misconduct, stood with Tom and his neighbors as they shared their stories. Karen, of course, was nowhere to be seen. But her absence didn't stop the news crew from filming her house, its dark, undecorated exterior a stark contrast to the vibrant homes surrounding it. The next morning, the story hit the news. The journalist's article, accompanied by footage of the neighborhood's light display, painted a damning picture of Karen's abuses. The headline read, "HOA President Faces Allegations of Corruption Amid Holiday Decoration Controversy." The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media lit up with messages of support for Tom and his neighbors, while calls flooded the HOA office demanding Karen's resignation. Even local officials began to take notice, launching an investigation into the HOA's finances. For the first time in months, Tom felt a sense of relief. The tide had turned, and the weight of Karen's threats no longer hung over his family. As he stood on his porch that evening, watching the star twinkle against the dark sky, Linda joined him. "You did it," she said, slipping her arm through his. "We did it," Tom corrected, smiling. "This whole neighborhood stood up together. That's what made the difference." But deep down, he knew the fight wasn't over. The final reckoning with Karen was still to come, and he was ready for it. The light of the star was proof that even in the face of darkness, hope and determination could shine through. The following week was a whirlwind. The news coverage of Karen's abuses had spread far and wide, turning what began as a small neighborhood dispute into a full-blown scandal. The HOA office, once Karen's fortress of control, was now under siege by angry residents demanding accountability. Emails poured in, public records requests were filed, and the pressure on Karen mounted with each passing day. But Karen wasn't going down quietly. She issued a public statement through the HOA's official email, claiming that the allegations were baseless and that the residents had misinterpreted the HOA's rules. The statement was dripping with defiance. "The HOA exists to maintain the integrity of this community, and those who resist our efforts are only harming themselves." Tom read the email aloud to Linda, shaking his head in disbelief. "She's really doubling down," he said, tossing his phone onto the table. Linda frowned. "Does she really think people will believe her after everything that's come out?" "Not for long," Tom replied. "The evidence speaks for itself." That evidence came to a head 2 days later, when the journalist published a follow-up story detailing Karen's financial misdeeds. The article included damning receipts, emails, and testimonials from contractors who confirmed that Karen had misused HOA funds for personal gain. The final blow was a leaked HOA financial report showing thousands of dollars unaccounted for during Karen's tenure. This time, the response was immediate. The state attorney's office launched an official investigation, and Karen was served with a court summons. News crews gathered outside her house, but she refused to answer the door, her curtains drawn tight. Tom watched the chaos unfold on TV with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. "She thought she was untouchable," he said, shaking his head. "But no one's above the law. Not even Karen." The next HOA meeting was unlike anything the neighborhood had ever seen. Normally sparsely attended, the room was packed with residents, journalists, and even a few legal observers. Karen arrived late, her usually confident demeanor replaced by visible unease. She avoided eye contact with anyone as she took her seat at the front of the room. Tom sat near the back, flanked by Linda and several of their neighbors. The energy in the room was palpable: anger, anticipation, and a collective determination to see justice served. The meeting began with a motion to remove Karen from her position as president. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. Not a single resident supported her. As the results were announced, a ripple of applause and cheers swept through the room. Karen attempted to defend herself, her voice trembling as she claimed she had only been acting in the best interest of the community. "The accusations against me are exaggerated," she insisted. "I've worked tirelessly to maintain the standards of this neighborhood." Tom couldn't stay silent any longer. He stood, his voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Rose, maintaining standards doesn't mean exploiting the community for your own benefit. You've fined us, threatened us, and stolen from us. This neighborhood deserves better than your leadership." The room erupted in applause, and Karen slumped in her seat, defeated. In the days that followed, the HOA underwent a complete overhaul. A new board was elected, composed of residents who pledged transparency and fairness. One of their first acts was to rescind the fines issued under Karen's administration and refund any payments that had been made. They also introduced a new system that required a neighborhood vote for major decisions, ensuring that no one person could wield unchecked power again. Karen, meanwhile, faced legal consequences for her actions. She was charged with embezzlement and fraud, and though the case would take months to resolve, the community felt a sense of closure knowing she was being held accountable. That Christmas Eve, the neighborhood came together for a celebration unlike any other. Homes were adorned with lights, lawns were filled with cheerful decorations, and the air was alive with laughter and music. Tom's star, the centerpiece of it all, shone brighter than ever. As Tom stood in his yard, watching children run around and neighbors exchange warm holiday wishes, Linda joined him, slipping her hand into his. "We did it," she said softly. "We really did it." Tom smiled, looking around at the vibrant, united community. "It wasn't just us," he replied. "Everyone stood up for what was right. That's what made the difference." As the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, the star on Tom's lawn seemed to glow even brighter, a symbol of resilience and hope. No matter how dark things had seemed, the Harpers and their neighbors had proven that light would always prevail. And for the first time in months, the neighborhood truly felt like home again.